Welcome to the Business SOS podcast. This is Rich Sierra, President of Florida Small Business Legal Center. This is episode 84 of Business SOS as we continue moving forward to episode 100. We're excited to reach that milestone perhaps in a few weeks, maybe 2 months or so. So before I start the show, I want to tell you a story. So as you probably know, I've talked before, I love tribute bands. And I go regularly to the Funky Biscuit right here in Boca Raton. They're not a sponsor. Maybe they should be at some point. But if you go there, they have great shows there. We got tribute bands. And so I go there pretty much every month. So any 80s tribute band there, I'll go see it with my wife. So I was just leaving this show. I saw this studio called Podpopuli. And I saw several tiles. And I saw a recording studio there. And obviously they were closing in the evening. And I told my wife, Sharon, I want to do a podcast someday. I want to try it. So as I keep going to the show, seeing the studio, one day I decided to make that phone call. And I called, I met with the representative, and about a year and a half ago, by 2023, we got started with the podcast. And my life has changed ever since. So today, I have a special show for you, because I have the man who made it happen. We're here today with Brian Howie, who's the founder of Podpopuli. He's going to tell us everything about it. And today's show is named Leveraging Podcasting for Business Marketing Success with Brian Howie. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thanks for having me. I'm proud of you. I'm super proud of you. You're closing on 100 episodes.
Yes. I'm very, very excited. So before we start, tell me a little bit more about your background.
I am, now I'm colloquially known as the Podfather, but I've been a writer, director, producer for a long, long time. I've been in the entertainment business for 30-something years. Television, theater, live events, everything, books, publishing, everything you could do in terms of what I consider all to be storytelling. And in my journey, I always was behind the scenes. I was a writer, I was a director, I was a producer. I was never, quote unquote, the talent. About 10 years ago, I wrote a book, a semi-tongue-in-cheek dating book called How to Find Love in 60 Seconds. My manager at the time said, why don't you, instead of doing a traditional book tour, why don't you do a promotional event in a theater instead of doing 24 people in a Barnes & Noble, why don't you sell a couple hundred tickets and bring up some of the questions that the book raised in sort of a town hall style format.
Okay.
I did that. It turned into, I suddenly was thrown in the deep end as the talent, which I'd never been before, and raised some of the questions and then somebody came to me, a very successful podcaster and piece of personality, I'm Adam Carolla, and he said, why don't you have a podcast? And I said, I don't know how to do a podcast. And he said, you could reach so many more people than traveling around with this live touring show with a podcast. He took all the hard parts out of podcasting for me, which enabled me to be successful. And then I thought, well, how many people could be podcasters if we did the same thing and took the hard parts out? And so we started Podpopuli.
And when Adam Carolla reached out to you, that was, when did that happen?
10 years ago.
So that was before podcasting was popular.
It was the infancy. It was back then. Look, that was my answer to him. I don't know how to do a podcast. Okay. 70% of people at that time had never listened to a podcast, didn't know how to find it on their phone or whatever. It was in its infancy. So, yeah, that was kind of the Wild West of podcasting. There were no analytics. The distribution was strange. And he's like, because he was probably 3 or 4 years before me, he is literally one of the pioneers. He's like, trust me on this platform. This is where it's going. Radio is dead. Blah, blah, blah. A voice in the head is a very powerful thing, and being able to leverage that. And he both let me do whatever I wanted and both gave me the guardrails to understand what makes a good podcast. And I became successful. That podcast ultimately became the number one dating and relationship podcast in the world, which, trust me, I've never been married. I'm no expert on anything. My job is to raise the questions, not give the answers. I've since toured that podcast live all over the world in 13 countries. But understanding like what it was like to be a podcaster and what it was like to have that thing, that started this business. Because I thought if we took the difficult parts out and we gave people some producers and some guidance, how many voices, messages, brands, businesses could be shared through podcasting? And that turns out to be hundreds from us. Yeah.
That's a great story. And the name of the podcast is The Great Love Debate.
The Great Love Debate. Yes. Like I said, that podcast, I'm closing on my 500th episode.
That's amazing.
The subject matter on that, people are like, are you going to run out of stuff to talk about? No, it is the one thing that everybody in the world has experience with, opinion on, passion for, pain from, you name it. Everybody can talk about relationships.
And the funny part of it, I was preparing for this podcast, going through your background, and then I saw some of the clips of one of your tours in a comedy club. I think it was the Improv.
The Hollywood Improv, yeah.
Yes. And I'm like, this guy's so quiet here when I come here. And it's just like
funny.
the celebrity.
Yeah, I know. Well, a lot of, I'm not to call myself a celebrity. I'm probably a G-list celebrity. But, David Letterman, Howard Stern, especially a lot of comedians are very introverted. And it's so surprising. People are like, you're so comfortable talking on a podcast. And I feel like because I'm in control of the medium and being stuck in an elevator or stuck in an Uber and having to make small talk to me is literally debilitatingly terrifying. I had to go to a wedding last weekend. I was scared to death to be sitting at a table, put a microphone in front of me. Now, after 20 years, 30 years in show business of never having the microphone, I was just the writer, director, producer. Now I feel something liberating about we're having a moment and we're going to see where we're going to go with this conversation. I tell people, you want to have a conversation with me, sit down at my podcast. It's so strange, the difference for me. I just, I believe in the power of this medium.
Yes, and me too, obviously.
I don't have video on my podcast. I'm still a dinosaur about that because I think, like I said earlier, I think a voice in the head is a powerful thing.
Yes.
I like a little bit of the theater of the mind, but somebody came to here last night and she says, I've listened to every one of your podcasts. I'm like, no, seriously, how many? She goes, every one. Wow. I go, we're like 492. And I go, has the podcast changed for you? And she said, you've changed. And I go, what do you mean? And she goes, the more you did it, the more you became more vulnerable and more authentic and stopped being so jokey, comedy clubby. And she goes, I've met you a couple times. And she goes, I feel I know you better from your podcast than in person, which is an insult to me deep down. It's not good, but at least I do respect what podcasting can be and that sense of authenticity and organic conversation,
I agree with you. When I started doing this a year and a half ago, the first 5 episodes were unnerving. I just put the headset on, the microphone, I had my notes, and I just began to talk. And as I progressed, it became more and more comfortable. Then I listened to other podcasters, and I kind of began to develop more of a structure for the interviews, and also when I actually did the solo shows as well, in terms of the beginning, the middle, and the ending, and how I close the show, how I open the show. But yeah, it's like anything with practice. And yes, you become more vulnerable as you go along, and you become more comfortable as well.
Everything is reps. So many people, when they start podcasting, they're like, am I going to be able to talk longer? How many notes do I need? What am I going to say 10 times? And the more you do it, the fewer times you rely on your notes, the less you're cognizant of what am I going to do, or I'm going to talk about it, and you trust the audience. You trust that people are along for a journey with you no matter what. It took me, I don't know how many solo episodes you've done of your 80-something, quite a few.
Most of them, yes.
Yeah. It took me 2 years before I would do one by myself. 2 years.
Wow.
I needed like 3 or 4 people to hit the ping pong ball back to me.
Okay.
I didn't trust that the conversation was really between me and my audience. I thought that I had that. One day somebody didn't show up. I'm like, I have to do my own podcast myself. The reaction to that was, finally we're hearing from you. And I probably do every other one myself now. Yeah.
It is interesting you say that. I don't want to go into what is Podpopuli, but for me, I am more comfortable doing it by myself.
I am now too, because I'm not so worried. I know the subject matter and where I want to go, and I'm less worried that the guest won't go along for the ride. Totally agree with you. 2 years it took me.
Yeah. And then when I have interviews, I need to make sure that I ask the right questions, the interviewer is comfortable, that I'm able to get the information that I really want for the audience. So it's more preparation when I have a guest.
And it also helps me being a podcaster, because I kind of understand what you're trying to get out of my appearance here. Just like when I go on a news program, I get interviewed on a lot of morning news for stuff. Because I've been a producer for so long, I understand what they're trying to get out of the segment, which means I'm not so reliant on, I hope they ask me this question to give me this answer. I can sort of guide it as a guest in a way that I understand what they're trying to get and not put so much pressure on the anchor person or the interviewer. And so that skill does help.
Yeah. So let's talk about Podpopuli. What is Podpopuli?
Podpopuli is both a small chain of podcast recording studios. We handle everything from conception to monetization, recording, editing, distribution. And we do that in our 6 studios around the country. And we also do that remotely for people literally all over the world. But more than that, I think Podpopuli is a community, a collection of voices and personalities and passion projects and brands and businesses that we are sort of collectively trying to grow and share and promote and use resources for and build these voices together so that they can turn into something. We produce more podcasts on a weekly basis than anybody in the country. We're at about 300 now. We'll probably be about 1,000 by the end of the year. That's a lot. It's ambitious, but there are so many people, personalities, like I said, brands and businesses around there who need this medium, and our job is to try and welcome them in our community and give them the tools to grow.
I think it'll grow exponentially.
Yeah.
I mean, this is just the beginning.
I agree.
What inspired you to open Podpopuli, to create it?
My own personal need. I knew that I was in Los Angeles, and there's probably 4 podcast studios in Los Angeles. And at that time, there weren't thousands of podcasts. There were a couple hundred. So the studio that I wanted to record in, I had to get a strange like you can get 6 a.m. Sort of like if you're a hockey parent, you know how hard it is to get ice time. Same thing. There just weren't enough studios, and I would travel around the country doing my Great Love Debate live show, and I would need to record my podcast, and I'd call like a radio station, or I'd carry equipment around in my bag, and I'm like, this is growing, and there aren't enough places to do it, and people who knew how to do podcasting. So I wanted to open our first couple locations in places that were not New York and Los Angeles. I'm from New York and I lived in LA a long time. I wanted, quote unquote, normal people to podcast, because back then a lot of podcasting was celebrity driven and stuff like that. I wanted to find the voices. We modeled our business a little bit after Dry Bar, the hair drying place.
My wife goes there all the time.
Well, women are fully capable of blow drying their own hair, but it's really nice when somebody does it for you. And you know, our competition is people trying to do this themselves. 92% of people who try and record their own podcast and edit it do not make it past the 10th episode. That's a real stat. I've been there myself. So my inspiration was a little bit selfish, that I needed a place to record my own show. But I also knew that if we could take those barriers of entry away, there were people who were interested in this service, and we were right.
So what are the challenges somebody that is, say, wants to start a podcast and wants to do it him or herself versus going through a service like Podpopuli? What are the challenges they're going to be facing?
Well, not only is it the recording and the editing, which is technically challenging and takes a lot of time, and also if you're trying to do that yourself, you're also thinking about it. You're checking the monitor. Is this recording? Did I capture this right? You don't want to worry about that. But what really a place like this is, we are really trying to hone in on what every podcaster is passionate about and curious about. And we believe that a good podcast is formed at that intersection of passion and curiosity. And so we are guiding you, coaching you, helping you kind of discover what are the things you should be talking about, helping you book guests, be a guest on other podcasts. These sort of services are things that it's really hard to do on your own. And those are the things that I think have more value than, you know, hitting record or learning how to, because lots of people are pretty skilled at social media now and video, and you can shoot a movie on your phone.
Yes,
I get that. It is more than that. It's this sort of joining this community of creative and business-minded people who can help you get your voice out and share your message and reach an audience all over the world.
Yeah. What I like about podcasting and why I continue coming here every Friday and do it is that I have my own canvas.
Yes. That's so funny you say that. Yeah. My very first episode. So I was used to being in, like I said, the entertainment business, and the entertainment business is where no happens. So even if you have a good idea and you're making a film, a television show, at some point, some executive who knows nothing about what you're doing is probably going to say, no, it's a bad idea. It is a very deflating business to be in. I sit down and do my podcast. I'm in this really nice studio in Beverly Hills. Adam Carolla assigns me a producer, and I'm waiting for somebody to tell me what I can do and what I can't do. And then somebody comes in and is like, do whatever you want, figure it out. And I was both thrilled and terrified by that. That was more power than I was used to, but it gave me sort of enough rope that I could just sort of start talking. And I go, what do I do first? And he goes, start talking. And I was like, what? And a lot of podcasters come in, they haven't even really heard the sound of their voice in their own head. They sometimes put headphones on and they freak out.
Which at the beginning is a little unnerving.
They don't like it and you don't know. And I'm like, what did I just say? Can we play? Can we stop? The proudest thing I have about my podcast, which is really both a a weird, almost an OCD thing now. I've done over 500 podcasts between Great Love Debate and my other couple shows. I've never edited a word that I've said, not one word. I have this weird thing, and I think editing a conversation is dishonest, and I think a conversation... I've had a couple people on my show as guests, and like, oh, I screwed up, I shouldn't have said that, it's private, something. Take that out. I've never edited one of my own words. Now I'm like maniacal about it. I'll screw something up, and I'll tell my listeners, like, we don't edit around here. Yeah. Sorry, but I really believe, and that started back to the first thing when the producers and the people around me said, just trust it. And I learned to trust it, that it can be a little rough around the edges. You know, we opened during the height of COVID. Some people were podcasting in masks. Some people...
I remember, yes.
It was strange. And, you know, so now... But what COVID did, I believe, during that time, people were Zooming, and a dog would bark, and a kid would cry, and it wasn't such a perfect world for business purposes. And so I learned that even in podcasting, people know that maybe your phone rings or whatever, and it's not a television show. It's not perfect. Let it go. The audience, this should sound like a conversation. If you sneeze during a conversation, you sneeze during a conversation, you know?
Yeah, it happened to me, I think 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, I interviewed David Kinningson, an author, and as we were talking, all of a sudden my hand moved, and I would just, all the stage thing flew down the window, down the table, and I'm like, we're not editing this, it stays there.
It's authentic.
It just happened.
Yeah.
So we laughed about it, put it back on, and we continued.
People love the bloopers.
You know, so... Give me an example of some of the types of people that you have doing podcasts, and I know you have like so many of them. But when I saw the titles, there were a variety of different interests.
So
industries.
many different. A lot of the traditional businesses. So we have a lot of attorneys and real estate. Real estate is probably our biggest factor because realtors are very big self-promoters. But we have 2/3 of our podcasters are women. A big percentage of those are women who are in a new act, second chapter in life, recently divorced, starting a business, you know, kids gone, like that is a very big part. And people who are in a community already tend to be very successful podcasting. We do a lot of addiction podcasts, and because addiction, the recovery in the sober community, they're used to sharing their story. It is a sense of community in there, and authenticity. Those tend to do very well. We do a lot of kids podcasts. Kids are completely unafraid of cameras and microphones the way maybe we are. They're very natural on it. It is such a good way to learn communication skills and build confidence. Local business, athletes, influencers, some celebrities, pretty much anybody who has a brand, a business, or a passion project in 2025 should have a podcast. It's almost like having a website.
Yes.
And people say that to me all the time. They're like, are there too many podcasts? No, we're at a fraction of that's like saying there's too many books or too many websites or too many stories. There aren't. Niche podcasts, surprisingly, the more niche you are, the easier it is to grow a podcast. If you say, well, I do a fitness podcast. Okay, well, there's a million of those. If you say, I do a fitness podcast that focuses on 20-minute intervals, doing this or this, then people are like, oh, that sounds different. They do. We have a guy who does a podcast here. It's just about bacon. Just about bacon. Nothing else. Oh. And we're like, well, what is that? Well, there's 50,000 bacon people around the world in like a Facebook group that he belongs to. The goal is to cast a net out. And people are not just going to listen to you and think that's you. They're going to listen to you and think, Rich, you're me. You care about the stuff I do. Yeah. I want to learn the way you did. I share your perspective. I share yours. That is what podcasting can do. So we have pet lovers, and we have a woman who does it's called the Frenchie Connection. She only wants to talk about French bulldogs. I go, you don't want to talk about any other dogs? She goes, no. People who are French bulldog lovers know what we're talking about. It's huge. And, like I said, the world's a smaller place in terms of reaching them now, and you'd be surprised at how easy it is if you really understand. When we create a podcast here, we essentially work backwards. We try to identify who is the audience you're trying to reach. What do you want to get out of doing a podcast? What do you want your audience to get out of a podcast? So on and so forth. Your audience can change over time, but if you understand, like, these are the people I'm trying to communicate with, it makes it a lot easier than saying, well, my podcast is for everyone. Well, the dictionary's for everyone. That's not necessarily a good book to read,
Yes. And it's interesting that I brought Jamie Diaz, from the owner of Dynamo Dog Training Center, about a few months ago, and she loved the concept, and she now has her own podcast.
She's great. She was in here yesterday.
Yeah, she's a natural. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, pet lovers are passionate, and passion drives podcasts. Curiosity, expertise helps, but what it is the difference between expertise and curiosity when it comes to podcasting. A lot of people are like, listen to me and I will tell you how to do stuff. Well, a lot of people want to hear, here's how I learned what I learned because I failed 100 times. I brought up the addiction podcasts. The ones that do well are not like, I'll have you quit drinking in 30 days. The ones who do well is, the struggle is not ever go away. I understand rock bottom. I go through it because that is the listener. You want to take people on a journey of discovery. You have a lot of you're the good podcaster. I said before, my job is to raise questions, not necessarily give answers. Through raising questions, you have a lot of the answers.
Yes.
Knowing what questions to raise, that's the expertise.
We also have a way of connecting with the audience in a different way. So tell me, and I know the medium in terms of podcasting versus video, for example.
Well, video, not that video doesn't have a place in podcasting. It does. It's a great tool to promote. It's a great tool to understand who you're talking to, all that kind of stuff. But the least engaging form of content to watch for video is conversation. When you talk about watching something, you're competing with Netflix and skateboard videos and music, all kinds of things, which is why if you understand it's really about the voice in the head. It's podcasting really is a multitasking thing. It is things people do while they are driving, while they're watching their kids, while they're walking the dog, while they're working out, before they go to bed. And that is such an intensive experience. Radio is always perceived as background, which is why advertisers pay more for podcasts than they do for radio, because radio is like something in the background. Listening to a podcast and your focus is on these voices, it really does do well to promote whatever you're promoting, teach whatever you're teaching, share whatever you're sharing. And that's really how podcasting is different. It would have seemed crazy, especially in, scripted podcasts, crime podcasts. If you said to somebody 20 years ago that we're going to be listening to crime dramas the way like War of the Worlds was back in the 1920s, like radio serials, that people would do this. And it's true. It's people want the information put in their head while they're doing something else.
Yes.
And that's power podcasting. Is sort of the closest thing to that. So like I said, video has a place, video has an element, but at the end of the day, the overwhelming majority of people, sorry folks if you're looking at me, the overwhelming majority of people are going to consume your podcast by listening. And learning that is different. You have to learn that if you hold something up, most people are not going to understand what that is. And so you have to sort of wire yourself to understand that this is a conversation. That's not everybody thing. It's not easy to have a conversation with people you can't see, which is the audience. And you are literally talking to possibly tens or hundreds of thousands of people, and you're not. I do a lot of live speaking, and I like to see the reaction of faces. It's hard when you might record an episode and it drops in 3 weeks and there's no feedback. Like you don't know how it went over.
Yes.
It's a challenge.
Yeah. Podcasting is perfect when you're driving.
Yes.
That's when I listen to the podcast.
So do I. Long drives, drive around a lot. I'll consume a whole bunch.
You can download it. You can listen to it on a plane. It just give you a lot of different options.
Do you listen to your own podcast?
Sometimes, yes.
Yeah,
yes. Yeah.
Sometimes I do too.
Yeah.
I didn't used to. I do more now. I don't know why. I think because I feel, I think I've gotten better as a podcaster, and I think my subject matter has gotten a little more authentic. And so that even resonates with me. I'm like, I enjoyed that conversation. I kind of want to relive it. Yeah.
Sharon, my wife, you met her yesterday. She listens to other podcasts.
Wow.
And then she kind of gives me feedback.
It helps.
Constructive criticism.
Yeah. That's why reviews matter so much in the podcasting ecosystem, because Apple and Spotify, they want that feedback. They want to know what you thought of it. And that's really the only way to do it, Yeah.
So you mentioned Apple and Spotify. Just mention some of the podcasts that you populate the podcasts to from the podcast that we have here in Podpopuli.
Name some of the podcasts that we do?
Some of the outlets, the channels. The channels,
okay.
Yes.
The overwhelming majority of podcasts are consumed on Apple and Spotify.
Okay.
Now, you might somehow read a statistic that, podcasts are consumed on YouTube. A lot of people will play the YouTube video and they will listen to it, but that's not necessarily a podcast platform. In order, the top 5 are Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Amazon, which I think ultimately will win the podcast wars. I think ultimately Amazon with their Audible, I think they will dive in. Apple's kind of in it by default. Do you know why it's called a podcast?
No.
Has to do with iPod back in the day.
Okay.
The iPod, it was little snippets of information, and then it became a podcast. So Apple, when I started podcasting 10 years ago, there were like 4 people in Apple who had to deal with podcasting, which was a thing. So it's a side business for Apple. But Apple, Spotify, who's heavily invested in it, iHeartRadio, Amazon, and then there's some other sort of non-traditional ones. And Apple and Google, I think, will ultimately be. Once Google figures out a way to have YouTube and the podcast. So Google Podcasts has been a thing that has come and gone like 3 times. It doesn't exist right now. They are plotting a way for the analytics, so that their analytics, that they can understand if somebody's watching a YouTube video or somebody's listening to a YouTube video, because they want people to listen. And so being able to put that metric in. So, not to get too technical and too how sausage is made here, but Apple and Spotify, as a podcaster, you are trying to get your listeners to hit that follow button, subscribe button, whatever it used to be called, because then they're hopefully getting that content put to their thing every week. Yeah.
So as part of the Podpopuli services, when a podcaster comes in, they just record the podcast, they leave, and you take care of the rest.
Editing, distribution, marketing support, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, we want you to grow your podcast everywhere. We put it out on all the channels every week. Whenever you want to release it, same thing. So you don't have to worry about like when's it going to go out, who's going to listen, or whatever. Yeah, we do that as part of our platform.
Yeah, and it's a great service. Otherwise, you got to go one at a time and try to populate it, which will take you forever.
Yeah, no.
If you do it right.
Right, if you do it right. So there's probably 50 or 60 different places, and eventually people pick it up on their own, and then you'll be surprised. You'll travel to Germany, and your podcast is on some German podcasting platform. It's weird, and you're like, oh, how do they pick it up? Himalaya is it's like the Apple of Asia, and you get a lot of listeners. What AI is going to be able to do is going to take your podcast, translate it in your voice into Italian. And so then that will allow people in different countries to consume your podcast. It's even going to be allowed to take your voice and just create a whole new podcast in your voice of a subject. You're going to plug in a subject matter, and they're going to create it. That's the scary thing. People don't want that. People don't want to, because I went to a podcast convention last year, and this company was touting it like, you don't even have to record your own podcast anymore. Just give us your old episodes and we'll create new content. And the podcasters there were like, we don't want that. That feels dishonest.
It is dishonest.
And they were like, well, people who are coaching and they want to create more content, it didn't go over well. But the thing about being able to translate for you in your voice, we do a podcast here out of this studio by somebody who has ALS and can't speak at all. And the computer, his son interviews him. He has some very famous guests. He sort of blinks and brainwaves it into a computer over the course of the next week. His answers, we edit it, use old clips of his own voice, and it's perfectly done in his voice like he's hosting the podcast. It is the most remarkable thing. It is so inspiring. It's called Nothing Left Unsaid because he didn't want to not have a voice anymore. And podcasting allowed him to do that. So
that is an amazing story.
It's an amazing podcast, and it sounds like they're all in the same room, and it's unbelievable. Yeah, and he's been a public figure for a long time, so there's enough of his voice that AI was able to take it and put his thoughts into verbal words. It's remarkable.
Yeah, we can do an episode on AI. That's a whole different episode altogether.
Yeah, no kidding. It's the coming storm, not just in the relationship business, which I am in this too. Pros and cons.
Yes, business owners, a question that may come up is like, I'm not just good at public speaking. I'm just afraid of getting started. What advice would you give a business owner that really wants to consider doing it, but has that fear?
A lot of people, the first fear people always have is time. I don't have time. Well, it's an hour a week to record. It's probably an hour a week of other prep. Those 2 hours will be invaluable to you, and you're in the content business, If you're wondering if you're going to run out of things to talk about, or you're not going to be able to do enough episodes or whatever, that's why early on we try to figure that out. What are you passionate and curious about that will sustain it? Because then you could think, these are the conversations I have anyway. The conversation. We have an attorney who does a podcast here. You can tell she hates being an attorney, and you could tell that she's just doing it because she thinks she's supposed to do podcasts. It's not a good. I'm like, you should talk about television, talk about anything else. You clearly don't like being a lawyer. That resonates with an audience. Nobody's going to listen to this. You're not passionate and curious. So if we tap into that, it's like, I really love my business. I love talking about it. I love talking about customers, clients, colleagues, people. A lot of people. We have a real estate podcast out at our Scottsdale studio. She says, I don't care if anybody listens. I am using podcastings to get meetings with people in my industry. And this is the audience I'm trying to get in front of. She goes, if I ask them out to coffee, they're like, I'm not letting you pick my brain for an hour. If I invite them on my podcast, they'll all come.
Yes.
And she's like, this is how I'm using podcasting. So there's a lot of different ways to use it. Some people just chop it up and take a little bit of content. Some people transcribe, 20 of their episodes into a book and do that. There's content is content, and that's where this is going. When we first started the business, I'm like, oh my God, do I sign a 3-year lease? Is there going to be podcasting in years? There's always going to be the need for conversation and video and content. And so that's where this is going.
And as more people discover podcasting and they realize that you're really a one-stop shop.
Yeah.
I mean, you come here and you take the hard work out.
Yeah.
And you have, a really great studio here in Boca Raton, and then they come in, they record it, and they leave.
That's it. And we send you your finished copy, and we put it out to the world, and we let the world know about it. And if you want to be booked as a podcaster on other podcasts that help promote it, like, we do all that. And that's really what I like about it. I really like the personalities. I really like the stories. I've learned so much from you, not just meeting you, but listening to your podcast. Like, people are like, do you listen to all the podcasts? I don't. I listen to yours.
No, thank you.
Helps me as a business person, helps me as a communicator. Mm-hmm. I've learned how to navigate certain challenges. I've reached out to you personally with a couple. I respect your expertise. You've been an invaluable resource to me. Still going to charge you for your podcast, but,
of course.
But you have been terrific, and these are the kind of people that you kind of meet in this world. Yeah.
Yeah, I've met some interesting podcasters as well, and it's a great community.
Yeah.
And I think business owners are created by nature, otherwise they would not be business owners.
I agree.
And what I think that in before, in terms of my background, I do have a marketing degree. That's really my undergrad, and that's kind of my passion, marketing as well as law. In order to be successful in marketing, you have to have something unique to offer, and you also have to consistency over time. So what attracted me about doing the podcast is, like, I can create my own content, which will be impossible to duplicate.
No doubt.
And one podcast gives me 20 different videos.
Absolutely.
I can shove that into different audios. I can put it into my social media. For 1 hour of work, it gives me, exponentially 20 different potential posts.
Yeah. So
multiply that by 100.
Totally agree. And content is evergreen, and you can recycle it. And, every once in a while I'll run, I don't know if you've done this yet, something I want to talk about. I'm like, I think I did an episode on that 2 years ago. I repurposed it. I'm like, you know what? This is still relevant to me. Let's go revisit this episode from April 2023 and see what's the same, see what's different, and I will use that. It's always evergreen. When we first started this, we really only recorded and people who lived, geographically convenient to one of our locations. Well, now we do for people all over the world. We help set them up remotely. They send us their files. We set up their remote Zoom feeds, and it really has expanded our ability to take in more people to this community.
Yes, and also I was going to say this also can be a training tool as well, because I know there's another podcaster that uses it for training for her realtors.
Totally, yeah. She's like, it's easier for me to talk it out.
Yes.
To the personal, there's a lot of ways to do it. Some people, we always recommend podcasters to be weekly, because that gets your audience in the routine of doing it. The algorithms within the various platforms themselves, Apple, Spotify, they want regular content, but some people do quarterly, some people do monthly, some people, anything you need to do for your business or brand, or if you have a Facebook group with 30,000 people and you're talking about cooking, you should have a podcast.
Absolutely.
Same thing. Yeah. We do a lot of sports fans, very niche. Like, I'm a Cleveland Browns fan and I need to do a Cleveland Browns podcast. Well, you're connecting with these fans all over the world, and you can do that through podcasting now. They don't have to be local to you.
You mentioned something about repurposing content. What I do now, because I've gone through so many different topics, if there's a topic, for example, how to prepare for a deposition, that I've covered that in my podcast, I have a client who's doing a depo next week. Guess what? We don't spend an hour going over preparation. I'll send him, listen to his podcast beforehand. Let me know if you have any questions.
Yes.
And it reduces our prep time significantly.
Correct. And it comes across not as like a book on tape. It comes across as a conversation that you're having with. It sounds different to consume it as a podcast. Yeah.
And I've acquired clients as a result of it as well.
Great.
And part of it is because they hear me, they see me in my YouTube channel as well. There's a connection. By the time they talk to me, they feel they know me.
Yeah. And everybody's got, different reasons for their podcast. Some people are trying to make money off ads. Some people are trying to get one client. Some people are trying to be influencers in their space. There's all kinds of reasons, and they're all valid and worthy.
I have a few more minutes, too. I want to ask you a few more questions. Can you share with us a success story of a podcaster that started the podcast with you and how they have used it in her business or his business.
Sure. We have a lot of those, but I knew somebody who wanted to be a realtor, and they'd moved from another line of work, and they thought that there were 3 elements to real estate that interested them in getting into. And the podcast was called By the Beach, BUY, and it was based out of Venice Beach, California. And he knew that there's a million real estate people who probably knew the business and had relationships better than to just plop himself down in Venice Beach, California, and try and compete in this. And he thought, I need my potential clients to understand what excited me so much about this slice of California, which is, as we record this, is going through a tough time. Yeah. And so part of his podcast was not so much about like, here's a house that's for sale or here's why I'm your best realtor. It was crazy stories about things that he'd learned from the first 10 clients that he had. Somebody's like, I want a place to store my camel. He's like, I don't know how to find that. Part of it was his passion and interest in that part of the world. He was from the Midwest. He was cold. His dream was to live at the beach and do a lot of that. And then only a small part of that was about the nuts and bolts of the real estate and hire me and do all that. That podcast blew up, and it wasn't because he had a huge influence. People resonated with that. I'm like, oh my God, I want to go on his journey to discover real estate in there. And he was on the selling end, and they wanted to be on the buying end. He became successful as a real estate agent. Within like 2 years, his business blew up, and all because he found this authentic voice about why I love this part of the world.
That's a great story.
Yeah, he's fantastic. Same thing. We have had, a little bit different. 4 pretty seriously autistic children do podcasts. And something about putting on headphones and the voice in their head has given them a command of communicating skills that they had not had previously that is actually translated once they off the microphone too. Being able to control their voice and have a conversation through this podcasting has made such a difference in it. It's just unbelievable. It changed confidence, it changed communication, and everything. We get those stories all the time.
Listen, I'm a success story.
You are a success story.
I started this journey, and I realized how effective it was, but it really changed me because I actually became a better communicator by doing so. Mm-hmm. Just because you listen to your podcast, say, well, I got to slow down, I got to emphasize this, listen to my voice. And I'm very comfortable speaking in front of the camera when I do hearings. We assume with the courthouse when I go in front of the judge. So it really has helped me along. So you kind of improve personally as a result of doing the podcast as well.
No doubt. You become a better conversationalist. You become a better listener.
Yes.
Which trust me, I was not the best as, especially through my other podcast, which is called Dead to Me, which is about estrangement. It's about family estrangement, people who have not talked to their father in 12 years, whatever. That podcast got huge because I tapped into something. Well, that podcast has given me empathy and sharing trauma and being able to be really trust and all that. So there's all kinds of things you can do with it, and there's all kinds of things you can get out of it.
Well, tell me, where's Podpopuli located at? What are the locations you have?
Right now we are in... I'll just go northeast down. Greenwich, Connecticut, Cleveland, Ohio, Palm Beach Gardens, Florida, Boca Raton, Florida, where we are right now, Scottsdale, Arizona. I skipped over New York City by accident. Sorry, we have a new studio in New York City. Los Angeles also. But like I said, we have both affiliate relationships with studios all over the country, and we can also set you up to do it right out of your house, office, basement, out in your backyard, whatever you want. All kinds of things. But those are our basic 6-7 locations right now.
Vegas studio?
Vegas we put on hold. Okay. We opened it, and then there was some construction problems in the shopping center we're at. We have a studio to record out there, but and we have clients out there, but it's not one of our prime spots. But we are fully functional out there. But it's on the door. I should probably say Vegas. Yeah. Okay. There was a flood next door at the place we were in. It's a whole thing. But we'll record you if you're in Vegas.
Okay. Yeah, plan to be there.
We'll hook you up.
So what is next for Podpopuli? What are the plans?
Well, it's funny you say that. So when we hadn't even recorded our first podcast yet. We hadn't even opened the doors in Scottsdale, which was our first location. And one of the big people in podcasting said they heard about what I was doing, and he goes, "What's your goal?" And my goal 5 years ago was to get to 1,000 podcasts in our community. And that's still the same goal. And we thought that the path to get to that goal was to have 20 studios with about 50 each in them. We still may get there that way, but we'll probably have, 10, 12 studios by the end of the year with 50 in them, and then we'll probably have 500 podcasters from all over the world that we're also, recording and producing that way too. So that's a much bigger part of our business moving forward, being able to share that community, advertising dollars, resources, guest booking, cross-promote, every kind of thing across this big community. Like I said earlier, not to... I both say it with pride and I both say it with dread. We produce more podcasts every week than anybody in the country. Thousands a big number, and that is our goal by the end of this year with some of the partnerships we've done, some of the advertisers who are behind us. That's where we're going to go.
I'm sure you'll accomplish that goal. This is just beginning.
It is, and one of the hardest thing in the first couple of years was people coming to us and say, "What's your biggest podcast?" And our biggest podcast was mine. That's a bad answer. When that changed, then it's not. Then I'm so proud that I'm no longer the biggest podcast. I'm not even the top 5, and I had a 10-year head start on everybody. So the fact that these people have grown and grown, and that I love that. That's a source of pride for me.
You also mentioned that if someone wants to start a podcast, they don't have to come to the studio. If they want to do it, if they're, say, a different state, they're not close to the location, you also provide the technical support from them to do it from their home.
Totally. Whether it's equipment you need, which isn't a lot, it's not crazy. Mostly the editing, the distribution, the guiding, the marketing, the coaching, all that kind of stuff. Same thing. We handle it from everywhere. Yeah, that's a big part. Some people just, logistically we can't get everywhere. And then, like I said, there still aren't enough studios anywhere. We're the only company that has more than 3 in the whole country. We thought by now, a couple years in, there'd be one in every shopping mall. There's not. And good and bad, Sometimes it would make our life easier if people came in and say, "What do you do here?" And we're like, "Oh, we're like Panera. We make bread." But... Yeah. Explaining that, because we're still it's only, the number is only 70% of people really know podcasting. That's a big 30% leaving on the table.
Yes, yeah.
So
no, it's just the beginning. Brian, thank you for coming to the show. It is an honor to be your client. I am so looking forward to doing more podcasts with you.
I'm super proud of you. Seriously, when people ask us, and I will give you this, and I'll tell this to your face, and it's no joke. Give us an example of some of your best podcasts. We always send them yours.
Oh, thank you.
Always.
Thank you. That means a great deal to me, because it's been a great growth process, and I will look forward to continue working and growing with you as well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I want to close the show the way I close it. Again, I want to thanks Brian Howie from Podpopuli. And the way to reach the website is podpopuli.com. I'm going to spell it for you. It's PODPOPULI.com. Did I do it correctly?
You did. Podpopuli. It's a take on Vox Populi, the old Latin voice of the people. So,
and in our show notes, we're going to have a link directly to the website as well. And if you want to reach me, you have any questions, my email is rich@richsierra.com. If you want to learn more about our legal services, the website is floridasmallbusinesslegalcenter.com. We're on Facebook at FSB Legal. You want to watch the podcast on the YouTube channel, we're on youtube.com/@RichardSierra. If you want to give us a call, the number is 866-842-5202. Remember that Business SOS, a common legal mistakes, business owners make and avoid them. It's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. You can ask for your local bookstores as well. If you like the podcast, please follow us in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you see your shows. Also, remember to subscribe to the YouTube channel as well. Until next week, this is Rich Sierra. Remember that my goal is to help you succeed.